The 6th Supremacy Fleet had never lost a battle. Not once. Not in 400 years of expansion across the Velthari Reach. Not during the siege of Dorvan Prime. Not even when the Kasari Collective threw 17 dreadnoughts at Admiral Vrenn Solaath's flank and expected him to crumble like cheap starplate. He did not crumble. He annihilated them, reorganized his fleet mid-engagement, and then had the audacity to file a formal complaint about the quality of enemy tactics. That was the kind of commander Vrenn Solaath was. Precise. Unflappable. Legendarily, infuriatingly smug about it. So when the emergency alert screamed across the command deck of the Eternal Ascendancy, and when Tactical Officer Thavan Quells pulled up the sensor feed and went very, very quiet, Vrenn did not immediately panic. He leaned back in his command throne, crossed 3 of his 4 arms, and waited for someone to give him numbers he could work with. Thavan gave him numbers. They were not numbers he could work with. 42 Gorathi siege platforms, Thavan said, his voice carrying the particular flatness of a being who has processed catastrophic information and chosen, consciously, to feel nothing about it. 12 carrier-class vessels, approximately 900 strike craft, and, he paused. He blinked all 4 of his eyes in rapid sequence. Admiral, they've deployed ground formations on Kelthara Station, full planetary assault configuration. Kelthara Station was not a planet. It was a waypoint. A logistics hub. It had 17,000 civilians, a fuel depot, a communications relay array that connected 43 systems to the Velthari command network, and absolutely no strategic defense force worth mentioning. Its entire military complement was a garrison of 400 Velthari regulars, 3 orbital gun platforms, and a very enthusiastic militia captain named Orveth Dan, who had, on 3 separate occasions, submitted formal requests for better equipment and received, on 3 separate occasions, a form letter thanking him for his service. Vrenn stared at the tactical display. He stared at it for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "How long until my reinforcements arrive?" Thavan checked. Thavan's expression did something complicated. 18 hours, Admiral. And how long until the Gorathi complete their assault on Kelthara? Another pause. Tactical projection says 4 hours. Possibly 3, if Captain Dan's militia performs below average. Vrenn closed his eyes. He breathed. He performed the mental calculations of a commander who has spent 4 centuries being undefeated and is now, for the first time, staring at a scenario where the math simply does not work. 14 hours. 14 hours between the fall of Kelthara and the arrival of his fleet. 14 hours of Gorathi forces entrenching, fortifying, ripping out that communications relay, and going dark on 43 systems simultaneously. By the time his reinforcements arrived, Kelthara would be a fortress. Retaking it would cost him 50,000 soldiers and 6 months of campaigning, minimum. "Get me the coalition liaison," Vrenn said. Thavan looked up. "Sir, the coalition. The multi-species rapid response agreement. We signed it 7 years ago and have never used it because we have never needed it. We need it now. Get me whoever is on the other end of that agreement." There was a moment of scrambling. Several junior officers exchanged glances that communicated, with remarkable efficiency, the collective sentiment of "this is above our pay grade." Then the communications console opened a channel, and a voice came through, and Vrenn Solaath, who had never lost a battle, sat up very slightly straighter in his throne. The voice belonged to Coalition Coordinator Pessa Mbali, a human, which meant she was small, bilateral, distressingly squishy in construction, and, Vrenn had learned through extensive prior correspondence, absolutely relentless in the particular way that only humans seem to manage. Not aggressive, exactly, not even pushy, just persistent, like water, like something that had long ago decided that the concept of obstacles was more of a suggestion than a reality. "Admiral Solaath," she said, and he could hear, in the background of her channel, what sounded like the controlled noise of an active operations center. "We received your automated distress flag 14 minutes ago. We've already started moving assets." Vrenn blinked. "I only decided to call you 30 seconds ago. The flag triggers automatically when your system detects a force disparity above a certain threshold." A pause. A sound that might have been what humans called a smile coming through audio. "You really should read the full treaty documentation, Admiral." He was going to have words with whoever had signed that treaty. Later, what assets are you moving? That depends on what you need. Give me the tactical picture. He gave it to her. All of it. 42 siege platforms, 12 carriers, 900 strike craft, Kelthara Station, 17,000 civilians, 4 hours, 18 hours, the gap that should not exist but did. He laid it out with the precision of a man who had spent 4 centuries making impossible things manageable, and then he waited for her to tell him what she had that could plug a 14-hour hole in his defenses. What she told him made him go quiet in the same way Thavin had gone quiet. Not from despair, from something else entirely. I have a unit, she said. They're already in your sector, actually. Running a separate operation about 6 light hours out. I can redirect them to Kelthara inside 90 minutes. A unit, Vrenn said. 1 unit. Against 900 strike craft and a full planetary assault force. Yes. Coordinator Mbali. With respect, I need clarification on what exactly you're proposing, because what I'm hearing suggests either extreme confidence or extreme miscommunication, and I would very much like to know which. Another pause. Longer this time. He heard her choose her words, the way someone chooses which box to open, carefully, aware that what's inside might change things. Admiral, are you familiar with the planet designated HR 7143 on Velthari star charts? Your people have a different name for it. You call it Veth Koral, the Red Deathworld. The command deck went quiet, not the professional quiet of officers managing their composure, the genuine quiet of beings who have heard something that reaches past training and procedure and touches something older and more instinctive. Thavin Quells set down his data stylus. 2 navigators stopped their work. Even the ambient hum of console activity seemed to drop a register, as if the ship itself was listening. Veth Koral. Vrenn knew the name. Every spacefaring species in this arm of the galaxy knew the name, though most of them whispered it. A world so hostile it should not, by any reasonable biological calculus, support complex life. Gravity 1.3 standard. Atmosphere with enough particulate matter to shorten cell lifespan. Magnetic field strong enough to disrupt unshielded electronics. A biosphere that had, apparently, decided that the only way to survive was to make everything in it want to kill everything else, constantly, as a default state of existence. And yet, something had evolved there. Something upright, bilateral, technologically innovative, and deeply, profoundly unwilling to die. Humans. You're sending soldiers, Vrenn said slowly. From Veth Koral. I'm sending the 31st Deathworld Infantry Regiment. Pessa Mbali said. And her voice had gone very level, the way voices go level when they are carrying weight. Commanded by Colonel Yara Stein. 96 soldiers. That's what I have available in your sector right now, Admiral. 96. Vrenn looked at Thavin. Thavin looked back at him. The math was absurd. The math was insulting. The math was, by any rational military doctrine, a death sentence for 96 beings, and no meaningful impact on the outcome at Kelthara. And yet, he thought about what he knew of human soldiers from Veth Koral. He thought about the documented engagement records that the Coalition shared with member species, the ones that used words like adaptive and persistent and casualty ratios that made Velthari generals review the files twice because they assumed errors in data entry. He thought about a species that had looked at a planet actively trying to murder them and, instead of leaving, had decided to get better at surviving. Generation after generation, for 10,000 years, getting better at surviving things that should not be survived. Send them, he said. The 90 minutes passed with the particular slowness of time under pressure. Vrenn managed his fleet, positioned what forces he had, issued orders to Captain Orveth Dawn on Kelthara to hold his militia together and make the Gorathi pay for every meter of that station in time, if nothing else. Dawn's response was brief and carried the energy of a man who had been waiting his entire career for someone to take his request seriously enough to tell him to fight. The Gorathi assault began in hour 2. Vrenn watched it on his tactical display, the strike craft dropping in tight formation patterns, the siege platforms opening fire on Kelthara's orbital guns with the methodical patience of a force that knows it has won before the fighting starts. The 3 orbital platforms returned fire and managed, somehow, to cripple a carrier before they were overwhelmed. Dawn's militia dug in on the station's lower levels and turned the access corridors into the most expensive real estate in the sector. They were holding. They were not going to keep holding. Vrenn knew it. Dan probably knew it too. But they held, and they bled the Gorathi, and they bought time that now, for the first time, had somewhere to go. At hour 3, with Kelthara's outer sections in Gorathi hands and the militia condensed around the communications relay in a last defensive ring, Thavin Quells said, very quietly, "Admiral, I'm reading a new contact. Transponder confirms coalition registry." A pause. "It's a single dropship. Moving at, sir, that velocity reading is going to require me to check my sensors. Is it correct?" A longer pause. "Yes. They're coming in hot, Admiral. Very hot. Evasion pattern I don't have a classification for." On the tactical display, the single contact burned through the outer Gorathi formation like it hadn't noticed the formation existed. Strike craft broke away to intercept. The dropship didn't evade them, exactly. It moved through them the way a thrown stone moves through rain, not avoiding the drops, simply being something that the drops do not meaningfully affect. Two strike craft that made close intercept runs simply ceased to register on sensors. The dropship did not slow down. "Sir," Thavin said, and his voice carried something Vrenn had not heard in it before. "In 400 years of service together, it's going to land directly on the contested level. Not the safe zone. Not the perimeter. The contested level. The part of Kelthara Station that was currently occupied by Gorathi assault troops in active combat with a militia that had run out of ammunition for 2 of its 3 weapon types." The dropship hit the deck of Kelthara Station's cargo bay, like a controlled meteor, and Colonel Yara Stein walked out of it. Colonel Yara Stein was not what the Gorathi assault commander, Sub-Warlord Drak Uveen, had been expecting. He had been expecting nothing, truthfully. His sensors had flagged the incoming contact, his fighters had moved to intercept, and then his fighters had stopped reporting in, and he had filed that information under problems to address after the station is secured. He had not considered the possibility that the contact was something requiring immediate personal attention, because nothing in his 30 years of campaigning had prepared him for the concept of a single dropship being a tactical problem. And then the cargo bay doors blew inward, and Yara Stein walked through the smoke. She was not large. That was the first thing that confused the Gorathi troopers who saw her. They were large. Gorathi were, as a species, built along the architectural principles of something that had decided size was the primary solution to most problems. Broad, armored in natural chitin, standing nearly 2 meters at the shoulder. They looked at this human woman, compact and upright in her matte black combat rig, and the ones with functioning threat assessment instincts felt something they could not immediately name. The ones without functioning threat assessment instincts moved to engage her. Vrenn watched the combat feed from the station's remaining internal sensors. He watched it in silence. Beside him, Thavin Quells had stopped pretending to work and was simply watching. The rest of the command deck had also, with the quiet unanimity of beings witnessing something outside their existing categories of experience, stopped pretending to do anything else. Yara Stein moved through the Gorathi formation the way water moves through a broken dam. Not around it, through it. Her unit spread from the dropship behind her. And here was the thing that Vrenn's tactical mind locked onto immediately. They did not move in any formation he recognized. Velthari infantry doctrine, Gorathi assault patterns, Kasari flanking structures. He knew all of them, had spent decades studying them. The 31st Deathworld infantry moved in something that looked at first glance like chaos but was not. It was adaptation. Real-time, continuous, individual-level adaptation. Each soldier reading the environment and the enemy simultaneously and making decisions at a speed that made Thavin's sensor refresh rate look leisurely. 96 soldiers, against a Gorathi assault force of 6,000, dug into a station. The math was still absurd. The math had simply become interesting. Corporal Fenwick Osei was the first one to reach Dan's militia, which had condensed itself into a ring around the communications relay on sub-level 4, with the grim, economical organization of people who have accepted that they are probably going to die, but have decided to make it inconvenient for everyone involved. Osei was 23 years old, born on Veth Koral, in a settlement that sat at the base of a mountain range where the local megafauna used smaller predators as entertainment. He had grown up learning that the difference between alive and dead was usually a matter of about 3 seconds of correct decisions. He had joined the 31st at 17, which meant he had been making correct decisions at speed for 6 years, and it showed. He dropped through an access hatch into sub-level 4, rolled, came up next to a militiaman named Sergeant Brielle Tark, who was in the process of holding a barricade with one functioning weapon and pure stubbornness, and said, very calmly, "We're here. What do you need?" Tark looked at him. She looked at the access hatch he had dropped through, which was on the wrong side of the barricade, which meant he had come from Gorathi-held territory. She looked back at him. "How many of you are there?" 96. A pause. A very long pause for a woman in the middle of a firefight. Total. Tark processed this. She had a particular expression on her face, one that Osei recognized because he had seen it on people meeting Deathworld soldiers for the first time, this collision between what the numbers said and what the person in front of them was radiating, which was the absolute, foundational, bone-deep certainty that the numbers were not the relevant variable. "All right," she said finally. "Gorathi have 3 heavy weapon emplacements on the upper level, 2 breach teams working through the eastern corridor, and their commander set up a command post in the refueling hub about 400 meters north." Osei nodded. He touched his commel. "Colonel, militia contact made. 3 heavy emplacements upper level, 2 breach teams east corridor, command post 400 meters north in the refueling hub." Yara Stein's voice came back immediately, level and precise, with the particular quality of someone who processes information and issues responses without the intervening step of worrying about them. "Heavy emplacements are Reyes, Chukwuemeka, and Park. Breach teams are mine. Command post when ready. Go." Sergeant Brielle Tark listened to this exchange, and then said, "To no one in particular. They've been on the station for 4 minutes. Osei was already moving. 3.5, actually. Up on the Eternal Ascendancy, Sub-Warlord Drak Uveen was having what his species would have described as a crisis of professional confidence. He had 6,000 soldiers on that station. 6,000. He had spent the better part of 2 hours methodically reducing its defenses, section by section, with the patience of a commander who respects logistics and does not take unnecessary risks. He had a clear path to the communications relay. He had the militia pinned. He had, by every measure he possessed, won this engagement before this strange little dropship had arrived and started doing things to his tactical situation that he did not have language for. His breach teams had stopped reporting in, not in the way units stop reporting in when they are engaged and busy, in the way units stop reporting in when they have encountered something that has resolved the question of their continued existence. His heavy weapon emplacements on the upper level had gone dark in a sequence so fast that his fire control officer had initially flagged it as a sensor malfunction. His command post in the refueling hub, which was 400 meters from the nearest confirmed enemy position and surrounded by 2 companies of his best troops, had just reported contact. Contact. Inside the perimeter. Inside the inner perimeter. He had no explanation for how that was physically possible. He was about to ask for clarification when his command post stopped reporting too. Vrenn Solaath watched the tactical picture shift, in real time with the focused attention of a commander understanding, for the first time, what he had actually asked Pesa Mbali to send him. Not soldiers in the conventional sense, not a rapid response unit or a special operations team in any framework he had previous reference for, something older than that. Something that Veth Koral had built over 10,000 years of telling a species it could not survive, and watching that species argue back. The Gorathi formation on Kelthara was not breaking. Gorathi did not break easily. It was one of the things that made them dangerous. But it was doing something Vrenn had never seen a Gorathi formation do before. It was hesitating. 6,000 soldiers, trained and equipped and previously confident in their overwhelming advantage, had developed a hesitation that was spreading through their unit structure like a fracture through starplate under pressure. They could not find the enemy. They could hear the enemy. They could measure the enemy's effects on their forces with terrible, escalating precision. They could not find them. Colonel Yara Stein had not won the battle yet. She had done something tactically more significant. She had made 6,000 soldiers uncertain about the floor they were standing on. Drak Uveen made the decision that sub-warlords make when their professional confidence has been comprehensively dismantled and their tactical picture has become incomprehensible. He called for a consolidation. Pull back, compress the formation, establish a defensible perimeter around the primary objective, wait for clarity. It was a sound doctrine decision. It was, under any normal circumstances, the correct response to a deteriorating tactical situation. The problem was that Colonel Stein had been waiting for it. She explained this to Captain Dan's militia, briefly. While they redistributed ammunition her unit had pulled from disabled Gorathi positions, because of course they had done that too. Consolidation meant compression. Compression meant the Gorathi were voluntarily reducing the area Stein's soldiers had to cover and increasing the density of targets in a confined space. She had been running a dispersed harassment pattern specifically to encourage this response, and it had taken, she noted without particular inflection, about 11 minutes longer than she had expected, which meant the sub-warlord was either more disciplined than average or had been in denial for approximately 11 minutes. Captain Orveth Dawn, who had spent years submitting requests for better equipment and receiving form letters, and who had then spent several hours holding a corridor with insufficient ammunition against 6,000 Gorathi, and who was now standing next to a human soldier from a Deathworld, explaining tactical manipulation like she was describing the weather, had a very specific expression on his face. It was the expression of a man who has revised his understanding of the universe and is still in the process of filing the paperwork. "Your colonel," he said to Osei carefully. She planned for their consolidation response. She planned for all three of their likely responses, Osei said, checking his weapon. Consolidation was the one she preferred. Why? Because it's the only one that ends in the next 40 minutes. The other two would have taken a couple of hours and been less tidy. The Gorathi consolidation completed. Drak Uvain compressed his forces around the communications relay, established overlapping fields of fire, and waited for whatever was coming at him to show itself so he could demonstrate, with 6,000 soldiers and superior equipment, that the natural order of warfare was about to reassert itself. Yara Stein hit him from 6 directions simultaneously with 96 soldiers, and the natural order of warfare made no appearance whatsoever. Vrenn Solaath watched the final 20 minutes of the engagement on his tactical display, with an expression that Thavin Quells, who had served with him for 400 years, had never seen before. It was not satisfaction. It was not relief, exactly, though there was relief present. It was something closer to the feeling you get when you watch an expert at something you thought you understood, and realize that you had only understood the surface layer, and that there were depths below it you had not known existed. The Gorathi broke at the 43-minute mark. Not a collapse, they were too disciplined for that. A withdrawal. A controlled, dignified, rapidly executed withdrawal toward their extraction points, which Stein's unit accompanied them to, not to engage, but to ensure they left, which they did, with a thoroughness that suggested they had no interest in revisiting the question. Sub-Warlord Drak Uvain reached his extraction ship, sat down heavily in the command seat, and spent a long time staring at a wall. He had gone into Kelthara with 6,000 soldiers and a fleet overhead, and certainty. He had left with most of his soldiers alive, which he was professionally grateful for, and a deep, comprehensive uncertainty about several things he had previously considered settled. His after-action report filed 3 days later contained a section on Coalition Human Deathworld infantry that his superiors read 3 times and then quietly classified, because the implications were the kind that required careful management. On Kelthara Station, in the space around the communications relay that the Gorathi had failed to reach, Captain Orveth Dawn shook Yara Stein's hand. He was not entirely sure what else to do, which was fine, because she was not a ceremony person, and the handshake was enough. Around them, her soldiers were already moving through the station with the systematic efficiency of people who had another operation scheduled and did not believe in wasting transition time. 17,000 civilians, Dawn said. You held the relay. 43 systems stay connected. Stein looked around the station with the appraising expression of someone cataloging structural damage for a report she would write on the transit home. Your militia did the hard part, she said. We just changed the timeline. Dan thought about that. He thought about the form letters. He thought about the hours in the corridor with insufficient ammunition. He thought about the dropship hitting the deck like a controlled meteor, and 96 soldiers walking out of it into a 6,000-person war like they had arrived at a training exercise, that was slightly below their usual difficulty setting. "I'm going to need," he said, slowly, "a significantly larger form letter." Up on the Eternal Ascendancy, Coordinator Pesa Mbali's voice came back through the comm channel, calm and steady, and carrying that particular human quality of people who have done something significant and are already thinking about what comes next. "Kelthara is secure, Admiral. Your relay is intact. Reinforcements arrive in 11 hours, which gives you time to establish a perimeter before the Gorathi consider a second attempt." A pause. "I'll send you the full coalition documentation this time, all of it, including the sections about asset capabilities." Vrenn Solaath, who had spent 400 years being undefeated and had just watched 96 soldiers from a Deathworld hold a station against 6,000 while his fleet sat 11 hours away, looked at the tactical display showing a clear Kelthara and an intact relay, and said, with great sincerity, "Please do." In the after reports, in the classified files, in the quiet conversations between fleet commanders over the following years, the engagement at Kelthara Station was referred to in different ways by different species. The Gorathi called it the refueling hub incident and did not elaborate. Velthari command analysts called it a coalition rapid response success and filed it under doctrine for review. Captain Orveth Dawn, who finally received a transfer to a posting with adequate equipment and a staff that had read all the relevant documentation, called it the day the math stopped making sense and the humans showed up anyway. Colonel Yara Stein, when asked about it in a routine debrief, described it as a moderate complexity engagement with acceptable outcomes, noted that Corporal Osei's sector timing had been slightly off in the third phase, and that they would address it in the next training cycle, and moved on to the next item on the agenda. 96 soldiers, 6,000 Gorathi, 43 minutes. The 6th Supremacy Fleet never lost a battle. But Vrenn Solaath, who had spent 4 centuries knowing exactly what his forces could do and building his confidence on that knowledge, spent the rest of his career with a small, permanent, recalibrating uncertainty in the back of his mind, reserved specifically for the question of what the humans next to him were actually capable of. It was, he would later admit to Thavin over a very long drink, not an uncomfortable feeling, just a humbling one. And in 400 years of undefeated campaigns, humbling was something new entirely, and new, he had learned, was not always bad. Sometimes new was 96 soldiers walking out of a dropship and into a war and changing the shape of everything.